Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the University of Houston. My name is Stephen Long, Dr. Stephen Long. I'm an instructor at University of Houston's English department, and I'm also a member of the Fo Guangshan Temple, Changmei Fo Guangshan Temple as well. And I am very pleased to see this turnout. It's always very moving to see people coming to an event at a time like 10:30 in the morning on a weekday. It shows an enormous amount of commitment on your part. I really appreciate it, and our temple very, very much appreciates it. Welcome to our event today, presentation by Venerable Miao Wang. Thank you once again for attending. We hope this will be a wonderful experience for everybody. There are some very important people in attendance today that I want to recognize. Can we recognize Mr. and Mrs. Peter Chen, the Director General of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office? And also Patrick Ho and Sophie Chow. They are also directors of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Houston. We're delighted to have you here with us. Thank you. Special thanks to Lydia Chow. Can you stand up? Lydia is responsible for our flower arrangements and helped make this event possible. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'd like to also invite any of the BLIA members, the Buddhist Lights International Association members, Yellow Vest, who helped put this event together. You get an enormous amount of work to put this together. Could you stand up? Did a wonderful job with this. Our speaker this morning is the Venerable Miao Wang. The Venerable Miao Wang is the personal English interpreter of Venerable Master Xing Yun. She is also Deputy Chancellor of the Fo Guangshan Institute of Humanistic Buddhism. She's Adjunct Professor in the Department of Religious Studies at Nanyue University and Director of the Fo Guangshan Dictionary of Buddhism English Translation Project, which I assure you is a massive project, very impressive. Fo Guangshan is an international Chinese Buddhist monastic order based in Taiwan that practices humanistic Buddhism. The headquarters of Fo Guangshan, located in Daxu District, Kaohsiung, constitute the largest Buddhist monastery in Taiwan. The organization is also one of the largest charity organizations in Taiwan. Its counterpart for lay people is known as the Buddhist Lights International Association, or BLIA, and that's who you see with the yellow vests. Founded in 1967 by the Venerable Master Xing Yun, the order promotes humanistic Buddhism and is known for its efforts to modernize Chinese Buddhism. It is famous for its use of technology, and its temples are often furnished with the latest equipment. In Taiwan, the Venerable Master Xing Yun is popularly referred to as one of the, quote, four heavenly kings, and Fo Guangshan is considered one of the four great mountains, or four major Buddhist organizations of Taiwanese Buddhism. In the Venerable Master Xing Yun's words, the Fo Guangshan Buddhist order is, quote, an amalgam of all 8 schools of Chinese Buddhism. Since 1967, Fo Guangshan has established temples and organizations in 173 countries throughout the world, served by 3,500 monastics, both male and female. Fo Guangshan Buddhism emphasizes education and service, maintaining universities, Buddhist colleges, high schools, libraries, publishing houses, translation centers, but also Buddhist art galleries, tea houses, and even a television station. Fo Guangshan provides social and medical programs to the world's most vulnerable. Free medical clinic with mobile units that serve remote villages an annual winter relief program organized to distribute warm clothing and food supplies to the needy, a children's and seniors' home, wildlife conservation areas to protect animals, and a cemetery for the care of the deceased. Fo Guang Shan's social work focuses primarily on helping the poor in remote areas. It runs orphanages, homes for the elderly, and drug rehabilitation programs in prisons, and has been involved in some international relief efforts. The educational programs of Fo Guang Shan include our 4 Buddhist colleges, 3 regular colleges and various community colleges, and the Fo Guang Shan University was established in 2000. In short, Fo Guang Shan defines itself through its acts of kindness and generosity, and through its commitment to helping all people achieve a clearer, deeper understanding of the most profound truths. As a speaker of English, and like all people confined to the prisons of our spoken languages, I am surrounded in Harris and Fort Bend counties by a vast wealth. All around me are vast stores of wisdom and knowledge expressed in Mandarin Chinese, a language I cannot understand. We are fortunate, though, to live in a period in history when we can see cracks and fissures in the walls of our linguistic and cultural prisons. I would say that our speaker today, the Venerable Miao Guang, is kind of a big deal because she represents the Fo Guang Shan Buddhist order in its English language manifestation. For those of us willing to open ourselves to a much broader world, Venerable Miao Guang represents, in her unique abilities, intelligence, and wisdom, a door opening to this much broader world. Her topic is We Are All Buddhas, My Journey of Self-Discovery. I would ask you to please stand up and welcome our speaker, the Venerable Miao Guang.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your kind introduction. Please have a seat and relax. Just don't fall asleep. I'll try my best. First of all, I'd like to thank Lydia and James Zhao for giving me this great honor to be a part of the Zhongmei Cultural Forum. I never realized I would have this honor. And secondly, I would like to thank Venerable Juefa, the Venerables of Zhongmei Temple, and Blia Houston for being here today to share this very precious moment and to witness a Buddhist nun talking about Buddhism inside a chapel. A very nice experience. And also I would like to thank all the distinguished guests and friends of the University of Houston for being here today. Well, just as Steve has said, I did not intend to come to Houston with the preparation for a talk. I thought I would only be here to serve as the interpreter to Venerable Ru Chang. So I thought I would be coming to have fun and relax. So it turned out to be a much bigger deal than expected when I was given the opportunity to give a talk. And I was encouraged in the following way. Don't worry, whether you are an interpreter or a speaker, you're doing the same thing, you just have to keep talking. So that wasn't so bad. Okay, so I would like to open today's topic on We Are All Buddhas, my journey of self-discovery by expressing how fascinated I am as I stand here to look at all of these smiling and friendly faces and also the new faces whom I've just crossed paths with today or the days before. I couldn't help but thinking, how did someone who was born in Taiwan, raised in Australia, end up in Houston, and to be able to share these special moments with friends who come from somehow a different linguistic, different academic, and maybe different national backgrounds. But one thing I'm certain that we all share in common is the fact that we are all Buddhas. We are all uniquely different in the same way. And so that is also what I would like to explore with you today, with some experiences that I would like to share as to how I traveled this path of exploration and discovery under the guidance of Buddhism, as well as my teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun. And I hope that what you hear today will serve as some kind of reference should you be interested to pursue your own journey of self-discovery paved by the so-called Dharma. And as said before, as we come from different backgrounds, when I was raised in Taiwan, I experienced a rather different type of Buddhism. In Taiwan, all I was asked to do when I entered Buddhist temples and shrines is to bow without reason and to pray to the Buddhas and Guanyin. So according to my mom, if I did that, I would be smarter, I will have a good life, and I will be blessed by the Buddha. But as I arrived in Australia, I discovered that I landed in a rather different educational background in that we were no longer being simply fed and asked to follow ideas. So from age 12 in Australia, I began my journey of questioning what is being given to me. And so that gave me a different facet to how I could understand the faith that I grew up with in a very different way. We were being challenged to ask questions. We were being challenged to find our own answers. And then after I graduated from the University of New South Wales in Australia, and as I took on the journey by deciding to, instead of putting on my graduation gown in Australia, I went to Taiwan, attended a full ordination ceremony. So instead of one graduation gown, I received 3 monastic robes that I had to put on a 100-degree day as my way to pledge my dedication to my spiritual journey. So that wasn't so bad. And what followed had been extremely fascinating. I feel extremely fortunate to be able to join the Foguang Shen family, who had shown me to an amazing world, and through which, having served as the interpreter to the founder, Venerable Master Xing Yun, he also gave me a very different view to what Dharma is supposed to be. And so my journey of self-discovery is not a simple journey of becoming a Buddhist, but my journey of self-discovery is really to come across face to face with that inner Buddha, which all of us have. And so I would like to then continue to the next question. What do we mean by Buddha? We look at Buddha in many different ways. And the word Buddha came from this idea of a historical man who supposedly founded Buddhism. But I couldn't help but wonder who actually came up with this very idea of Buddhism. Certainly it wasn't the Buddha himself. When he attained enlightenment, he didn't sit underneath the Bodhi tree, and when these practitioners or the shamans approached him and asked, "What have you become?" he didn't open his mouth by saying, "Oh, I'm here to teach all of you Buddhism." He simply said that I am just a human being who has now awakened to a very priceless truth. And so if he never told us that he has come to teach Buddhism, so how does this word come about? If I break it apart, we'll be able to see that the word Buddhism comes in 2 parts. First of all, the first part, word Bud, is a root word, a Sanskrit root word which simply means to awake. Right? So Buddha, being a past participle, means that this is a person who has awakened. Right? So somehow we all do that every morning. Every morning when you wake up, you become a Buddha, right? On a minor level, but it's just that the historical Buddha became awakened on a much higher level. We'll talk about that later. And then it was actually given a suffix, ism, which means belief, attitude, or style. And therefore, to put awakened ism together it becomes the very belief in awakening. Right? And so to translate Buddhism back into Chinese, then it wouldn't become 佛教, right? The religion or the teaching of the Buddha. It becomes 一种特别觉醒的主义, a special idea of awakening. So who gave this amazing 2,600-year-old faith the name Buddhism? We have to go back to the 19th century and come to this very, very important man, the Portuguese man who joined the English expedition and brought back a whole lot of manuscripts and artifacts from the Donghuang caves. And as he read through these manuscripts, what he realized was this amazing teaching spoken by a man called Buddha. And he says, wow, he's simply talking about the ways to become awakened to the truth of the universe. So since it's a very particular principle and belief, he has decided to call it Buddhism. That's how we came about with this particular name. So it's mostly known as a religion of Eastern and Central Asia that is based on the teachings of Gautama Buddha. So as I was raised to understand Buddhism in this way, that is why in my first 12 years of my life in Taiwan, it involved a lot of bowing, praying, and wishing, so that I will receive good blessings. But there's so much more to the word Buddha, because he is more than just a historical name. If you agree with the way I define Buddhism, you will also see that Buddha was a founder of a belief of awakening the self. This was a very unique belief. He was a teacher, but most importantly, the word Buddha includes a state of attainment that can happen in every one of us. So that is why I continue to say we are all uniquely different in the same way, if we manage to become Buddhas. But if you're working hard right now, if you're in the process of awakening, you're not so much a Buddha, we can call you a Buddhin, right? You're a budding Buddha who is slowly progressing towards that very truth. And so what exactly did the Buddha do? What did Siddhartha do in order to become a Buddha? I'm going to look at it differently this way. We would say he did not simply conform to tradition. He did not simply yield to the existing cultures and customs in India. Instead, he was a silent rebel. He was a silent rebel who challenged everything he came across. He was so intelligent, he was so privileged to given the opportunity to actually challenge all of this, and eventually came to realize there has to be a way to overcome the so-called word dukkha. And so I would describe this process as a process of self-reinvention, just as said by George Bernard Shaw, who said, life isn't about finding yourself. So learning the Dharma or learning Buddhism isn't about discovering your inner Buddha. Instead, he says, life is about creating yourself. And so the journey will be uniquely different from each and every one of us as the experiences of our life become different and developing in our own way. So Siddhartha too reinvented his own path to enlightenment. And at the end, when he was awakened, he simply said to all of us, okay, I'm going to point this path out, but don't expect to walk it exactly the same way. If you choose to, you should be in India, you should bare your right shoulder, you should eat nothing but 1 grain of rice or sesame per day, and you should only live under a tree. Okay? But that's not the way he introduced to us. There is so much more. So as this idea or teaching developed across history, what I realized in the East is that most Easterners regarded Buddhism as a way to transcend life and death, a way to lessen their bad karma, receive good blessings, so they can fulfill their wishes in their life. And as I came to the West, some fascinating discussions actually allowed me to realize that in many cases, Buddhism is explored and discussed in this West as a way to understand reality. Not so much as a religion or a mystical faith, but a whole series of scientific and phenomenal discussions about reality as it is, not reality as it should be. But as we continue to progress into a global village today, when you come across so many young people who come from a different background, you have to realize today when you walk up to a student and say, "Where are you from?" Be prepared to receive an answer that says, "Where am I from? Do you have 10 minutes?" Right? We're looking at polyglots, global foreign students who may have the opportunity to study across at least 4 countries throughout the duration of their university life. So they are exposed to such great diversity and to so many options, and they have the chance to explore life on an interdisciplinary level. Therefore, we see now in the modern day, we start to explore the so-called Buddha or the idea of Buddhism as a way of life. So this is what you see in the East, right? A way of praying. Right? When I was young, I visited all these palaces and people were telling me that the bigger your incense, the higher your possibility of having your dream achieved. Or in the West, George Berkeley was the one who opened the gate in the West into how Western psychology combined with Buddhist psychology for us to see how reality can be understood on a more systematic, religious, spiritual, and scientific way. This was the question he raised. He says, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? So what would your answer be? Yes, but the answer unfortunately is no. Right? Why? Because sound is the vibration of air. And this vibration has to be caught by your eardrums in order to receive the very concept of sound. Therefore, if you're not in that forest, then the whole idea of the creation of sound does not establish. This was the very earlier discussions of Buddhist psychology that allowed us to really start to look at the Dharma in a very interesting way. I enjoyed it. But even more as I enjoy it is when I come across global modern families that begin to talk about Dharma as a way to seek happier and more peaceful lives. Whichever way it is, we can't help but realize that there's only one path to finding our answer. Is it a way of life? Is it a philosophy? Or is it a way to find blessings? Today, the journey I'm going to offer you is probably one of the shortest existing Buddhist texts, but one of the most abstract and difficult to understand sutra existing in Buddhism, which is called the Heart Sutra. The Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, which is the heart of the Buddha's teachings. So legend has it when Xuanzang, the greatest Chinese master who went westward in seek of Buddhist sutras, went along his tedious journey across the desert, he came across this unidentified person who sat down with him and had a short discussion with him. And during that discussion, they simply talked about the possibility of Xuanzang ever reaching India. And so he not only encouraged Master Xuanzang to keep going, and he says, when you arrive in Nalanda, I'm going to have the greatest secret to teach you. And so when Master Xuanzang finally made it in Nalanda, he sought out this particular man, and nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew where he came from. But nevertheless, he appeared in front of Xuanzang, and the two sat down, and he taught him the very core teachings of the Buddha, which was later translated into Chinese as the Heart Sutra. So legend has it that this particular figure was actually Avalokiteshvara, Guanzizai, who wanted to nudge Xuanzang on and to assist him in the spread of the Dharma. Whether or not this legend is true or not, it's a very beautiful legend. First of all, to help us realize that on the journey of self-discovery, none of us are alone. We all have friends who will struggle alongside us, who will be by our side, no matter we are going through thick or thin. And secondly, I would like to use the Heart Sutra as the main structure of my presentation today, because we have to understand that every single concept and practice of the Dharma starts from the heart. And so, I'm not sure how much you know about the Heart Sutra, but to give you the Heart Sutra in a nutshell, it's actually seen this way. Well, this is how I see it. I see it as a way of revision or a way of retrospection by an enlightened being who, having attained enlightenment, was asked the very question of how exactly do you attain enlightenment? But they didn't use the word enlightenment. Instead, they used the word, how exactly do you reach the far shore? And so, although the Chinese version of the Heart Sutra didn't begin with this dialogue, but you might see in the complete version, it was actually a question asked by Sariputra under the inspiration of the Buddha. So the Heart Sutra doesn't open with the comments of, thus I have heard, as recorded by Ananda. Why? Because in the very opening of the Heart Sutra, we see a vision of the Buddha crossing his legs, meditating and entering deep samadhi. He wasn't prepared to talk. Right? So by entering deep samadhi, he actually entrusted two of his brightest students to begin the dialogue. The first person was Sariputra, who was the foremost in wisdom, and the second was Avalokiteshvara. And so in his deep meditative samadhi concentration, the Buddha inspired Sariputra to raise this particular question to Avalokiteshvara. So Avalokiteshvara, on the slide, reclining in his seat, started to give us a retrospection of his path to enlightenment. So it is the eyes of an enlightened being who will show us what the world looks like. So as the saying goes, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. As a Buddhist, I'm going to change the first word by saying, actually, reality is in the eye of the beholder, depending on how you look at this world. So reality in the eyes of Avalokiteshvara goes like this. It opens by saying, when Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva was coursing in deep Prajna Paramita, he realized that the five skandhas are empty in nature, and thus he overcame all ills and suffering. This epic opening of how we as practicing and learning Buddhists knock into reality. But this is only level 1 reality. For the rest of the Heart Sutra, you're going to realize Avalokiteshvara gives us 3 ways to look at reality. And the first level is the first way for us to see through the eyes of an ordinary human being. An ordinary human being who believes that the very idea of Atman, or the self, made up of the 5 skandhas, form, perception, volition, mental formation, and consciousness, are as real as it can be. So when you sit here inside this chapel, Venerable妙is as real as she can be, and you in the bench is as real as you can be. But Avalokiteshvara says, no, I'm going to break your bubble today by telling that you are never as real as you think you are. So what do we mean by the 5 skandhas being empty in nature? So a little bit of psychology. You might imagine if we turn all of you, the form individual units of Atman or self into a diagram. This is what we all look like. This is how we perceive the world on 8 levels. The first 5 consist of our ability to physically sense the world with our eye, our ears, our nose, our body, and our tongue. We taste, we see, we touch, we smell, we hear the world. And what happens is, these sensory organs then pass on the data, the information, onto our brain, which is like the processor that processes the information. So upon the 6th level, we see pure perception when we begin to have feelings about the world. The very ideas of comfort, discomfort, or when you had your cup of coffee this morning, whether it was too strong, whether it was sweet. The process of naming that begins in your brain. And what happens is, the naming then passes into the 7th consciousness, which is where the Atman exists, the self, where you believe that every experience you go through is as true as you are. So it stays there, it becomes the experience of the self-creation, the self being created, and then the memory goes into your 8th level, which is your deep karma, that serves as your hard drive. So from then on, whenever you see something, you're going to have to go back to your hard drive, pull out that information, then decide how you're going to react to the experience at hand. Okay? So to make it simpler, on the very first level of form, right, our eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body interacts and sees some kind of shape, some kind of form and idea. And on the second level, we have sensation. Right? That is what is hot, what is cold, what is hard, what is soft. And then going into the brain in the process of formation of mental image for an object, we begin to create concepts about what a microphone should look like, what a chair should look like. And then in the end, going into our eighth consciousness, it becomes fixed concepts that gets activated again and again whenever the first five sensory organs are given the hint that, yes, you are coming across a similar experience. If I haven't lost you, that shouldn't be normal. Right? So I'm going to use a simpler experience now to further explain what I meant by the five skandhas being empty. So Avalokiteshvara goes on by saying, "Here, O Sariputra, form is emptiness, and the very emptiness is form. Right? 色即是空，空即是色。Emptiness does not differ from form, form does not differ from emptiness. Right? 色不异空，空不异色。I spent 30 years reading and reciting this line, never come to understand it. Right? So in my attempt to understand it, we're going to use the example of a wave. So by form is no different from emptiness, we have to look at the form of a wave that is made up of a series of conditions and elements, which is water, air, right, wind, and of course, the rotating earth. So without any of these elements, you won't be able to see the so-called wave. But we define this by the form of the shape of the water and its movement. And so, to go back to this previous line, this is simply how Avalokiteshvara teaches us to look at the world, by saying, okay, now we look into the characteristics of form in order to understand this line, which means that everything is interdependent, everything comes into being based on this interdependence. And once the elements fall apart, we will no longer see a wave. What do we see now? We'll end up seeing maybe just ocean water. And so he says, whatever is emptiness, it's the same as form. Right? The same goes to our previous discussion about the five skandhas. In the fact that what you see, what you taste, what you think, and what you think is true are not true. Well, this has been extremely confusing to me. Right? The secret of the Buddha's teaching has been presented in a way that requires further thinking. So I'm going to use an example now. By saying that form, perception, volition, mental formation, and consciousness are not real, we're saying that every experience is unique. And don't forget about the uniqueness of every experience. For example, we see in front of you a scoop with a very light yellow glistening scoop of some kind of substance. What do you think it is? It's kind of too bright, isn't it? So the pearl of being vague gives you greater space for imagination. What do you see? What do you think you see in front of you? Scoop of ice cream. Why is it ice cream? It's the scoop, right? Okay, so whenever you see the scoop of that shape, it's ice cream. And so this experience happened to the younger sister of my friend who went to South Africa. They sat down in a 5-star hotel restaurant. And so as soon as this little girl sat down at the table, she saw this. She told herself, ooh, ice cream. And so immediately, having remembered what ice cream would taste like, she reached for the scoop and put the whole thing into her mouth. And then the next minute, we heard her going, ew, it's butter. So if we go back to this whole process of seeing something, then naming that thing, and then deciding how you want to respond to it, and then taking action, then remembering the whole process, we become mini cycles that continue to repeat the same behavior based on what we remember and what we experience. Okay? And so the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara says, okay, next time you see something, why don't you give you a chance, first of all, to remember that each reality is unique, and remember how they are formed very differently. Therefore, your experience on this should be very different. So the next time you see something which gives you a presumption of what it should be, which is reality as it should be, by seeing that the five skandhas are empty, what Avalokitesvara offers us on the first level of emptiness is for us to realize that we, as human beings, first of all, need not be deceived by what we see and what we feel. And secondly, if we realize that every time we decide to take on an action, why don't we give us another chance to re-examine the situation before we act on it? And so what does this sound like? It sounds closer to the very idea of prajna, which means insight, right? An insight into reality and the conditions that made it happen. And so having that insight means we have more data and information to process before we decide to act on a more wise way. So next time you see this, if you say it's butter, you're right. If you say it's ice cream, you're also right. It can be anything, but your tongue will have to do that through justice. Okay? And so, by saying that, yes, when we look at all of these dharmas in a very different way, right? He says, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. So everything you see, every experience in life carries that particular experience. But he goes on to say one thing, they are not produced or stopped, not defiled nor immaculate, not deficient or complete. 不生,不灭,不垢,不净,不增,不减. The next thing we have to realize is that when we overly depend on our first five sensory organs, we have to realize that in many cases, the concepts that are being created were never really there. Don't let yourself be deceived by your sensory organs. So when the Heart Sutra says no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, or no mind, it doesn't mean that you really have no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind. Right? It only works for Mr. Potato Head, right? Who can put his feet on his eye sockets and keep walking and say, I can't see, I can't see. Right? But it doesn't happen to us. It's simply telling us that the conceptions and the experiences created by these sensory organs can be somehow complicated. So if you see the front face of a man, you're only seeing half of reality. And if you're seeing the side face of a man, you're also seeing half of reality. That's what we mean by no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind. Because the process of information becomes so complicated. I'm going to give you another example. Which way is the train moving? Is it towards the left of the screen? Yes? Or the right of the screen? Okay, we're going to have very different experiences. So why would one single image create such different experiences to so many different pairs of eyes and ears? That is because when your eyes pick up the movements and the form, and it would send a message into your brain, which when it processes the movements, it will have very different definitions of so-called motion. So there's no eye, there's no form, there's no object of sight. Nothing is real because it's changing all the time. But the more you look at this, the smarter you get. You eventually find a way to deal with this image. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and then before you open your eyes, I would like to ask you to fix your sight on either end of the screen. And whichever side of the screen you fix your eyes on, the train will move in that direction. Give it a try. Open your eyes. Okay, so if you looked at the left side of the screen, the train had begun to move to the left, right? And then now close your eyes again and move your side to the right of the screen. Suddenly you become the driver of the train. Interesting, isn't it? But the irony is there's no train. In the past minute, I've been asking you to focus on the so-called idea of train and its movement, while all along there's no train in this room, but you believe it was so real. So therefore Avalokitesvara says, okay, come back to reality. Don't believe everything you see. And so on this very first level, we look at this wagon wheel effect and think about the hint that your brain gives to your sensory organs, which changes the data immediately so fast. It tells us that when Avalokiteshvara tells us on the very first level as ordinary human beings, when we become deceived by all of this, realizing that everything we see is empty in nature, that is, that they're changing all the time, they're interdependent, it's really asking you, hold on, before you react to what you're experiencing right now, why don't you consider Prajna Paramita for a better understanding? That's all we are saying in this case. So reality as it is not what you see, but what you understand. But reality as it is what you believe to exist in your heart. 2 years ago, I went to Beijing, and it was a very long rectangular building that I stayed at. And on the day that I walked into the building, somebody told me that this used to be a wasteland, right? And Buddhists believe that wastelands were previously occupied by spirits who will begin to walk around the buildings that you build. Right? Well, I listened to the man, but as I listened to the man, I heard the sound of a little girl running down the corridor, screaming and having fun. And so that was the experience from the afternoon. But at the end of the day, after my talk, as I walked back to my room, when I walked down this long, long corridor, I started to have a very spooky sense. Why? Because at night, past 10 o'clock, they would turn off the lights of the corridor and leaving only the egress lights, which were green. So you have these very long, dark green corridors. And as I was walking towards the further end, I couldn't help but sense that the little girl was standing on the other end of the corridor, motionless, staring at me. But it was ironic because I told myself, hey, aren't you a Buddhist nun? Right? People say Buddhist nuns are not supposed to be scared of spirits. Right? So why would I have that sense of spookiness about a little girl who stands at the end of a long, dark corridor at 11 o'clock midnight? Right? So I told myself, okay, simply chant Buddha's name, keep walking, don't look back. Right? Go back to your room, sleep the night over. Right? But I couldn't help throughout the night wonder what the girl was doing there. And on the next morning when I woke up and opened the door to walk towards the dining hall, I looked down the corridor and I had the biggest laugh to myself. Because all along in the previous night, what I was sensing was a large piece of plant that had a huge leaf which looked like the girl's skirt. Right? And it was waving because of the air conditioning. So all along I have been scared by this huge plant that I thought was a little girl. But that was a perfect experience for me to understand what Avalokiteshvara meant by the 5 skandhas being empty. Because what you perceive to exist sometimes is not as they are. And so from then on the next 2 nights when I walked down the corridor, I was never scared again. So you have to wonder, where did the fear come from? Did it come from the lighting? Did it come from the plant? Right? It actually all came from within myself. And so by saying, yes, the 5 skandhas are empty, when we realize if this was never in your mind, there's no need to respond to it. Okay. And now let's move on to the second level. Avalokiteshvara continues to say to Sariputra, okay, on some level when we talk about no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body or mind, no sound, smell, taste, touch or phenomena, there are no objects of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. It's simply an experience of how human perception and cognition arises. But more advanced practitioners of the Dharma will begin to enter a state when once they're beyond the very conception of attachment to the self, they have the next thing to deal with. That is, reality as it exists in the environment. So Avalokiteshvara goes on to say, there's no ignorance and no extinction of ignorance, and so forth until we come to no decay and death. And so we understand this to be the cycle of birth and death, the 12 links of dependent origination, where everything begins with ignorance, mental formation, consciousness, the 6 sensory roots, name and form, touch, perception, attachment, clinging, birth and death. Right? This is what we understand of the 12 nidanas to be shrunken into one line. So who in this world has that ability to recognize that the cycle of birth and death can be severed? We call them the Sravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas, or the sages in Buddhism, who sees beyond the self, who sees the emptiness of this existing world and its phenomena. So, as a result, no decay and death, no extinction of such, and finally coming to no suffering and no origination, no stopping, no path. We read this all the time, but one way to realize what it's saying is the fact that if we want to put an end to suffering, first we have to realize suffering comes from within ourselves. Before I go on, I have to really clarify the meaning of dukkha. When the Buddha says, yes, the first truth I'm going to share with the world is that everything consists of dukkha. Right? And then it's translated into suffering, which is a state of discomfort and unhappiness. But dukkha simply means a continuing state that is also changing all the time. It's a state of dissatisfaction when we have certain desires or certain goals to fulfill. In other words, if we're able to transcend this concept of the self and begin to look at the world with a more open mind, we still need to be careful with the conceptions that the happenings of the world can change in us. Once there was a little girl who had 2 apples in her hand. Right? And the mom, having seen her daughter holding 2 apples in her own hand, wanted to teach the girl a lesson on sharing. So she asked her, hey, you have 2 apples. Would you like to share? Immediately upon hearing this, the little girl quickly took a bite of each of the apples, leaving the mom so disappointed. She wondered why the girl had to be so greedy. But before she got angry and decided to teach her daughter a lesson, she wanted to give her daughter a chance by asking her a question. Now, why did you take a bite of both apples? And to her surprise, the little girl pointed to one of the apples and says, Mom, here, have this one. It's the sweet one. So the mom felt so ashamed of herself because of her preconceptions. And she immediately locked into the phenomenon that by holding onto 2 apples herself, the little girl wanted to keep both. Yet the little girl with that innocent heart simply wanted to make sure that the mom gets the best one. Right? And so by that, when we say no suffering, right, really, suffering comes from the mind when we don't give us a chance, and when we don't give others a chance to sort out the situation. And so by that, we have to hopefully learn from Avalokiteshvara's lesson on this line to realize that anything that happens in this world, when we come across the Dhamma, remember, always respond with your better self. If you can respond to the phenomena with your better self, then you are coming closer to Prajnaparamita, right? The insight that brings you to the far shore. And then, let's come to the third reality. On the third level, having realized that the self has no substantial existence, and the fact that everything you see in this world and the happenings are too the same way, finally we come to what Avalokiteshvara is realizing. The third level, where she says, there's no cognition, no attainment, and no non-attainment. For there is essentially nothing to be attained. On this level, we are looking at the fact that even concepts themselves are empty. So Avalokiteshvara says, don't hold on to the concept of the self, don't hold on to the concept of reality, and don't even hold on to the concept of truth. Anytime you say this is the truth, you are attached, you are biased, so let it go. But we realize most of us will have difficulty grasping that concept because we as cognizing human beings have to depend on reality in order to exist. So this becomes the toughest part of our journey of self-discovery if we want to come to realize who we can really be in order to become that Buddha, to think about what exactly is there to attain and what is there to not attain. And then coming upon to this point, I have to use the very famous man, Socrates, to answer the question. Because Socrates told his students, the best thing you can ever know in life, even after this extensive knowledge, is to realize that you don't know. So by saying there's nothing to attain, Avalokiteshvara is also telling us that the best thing you can ever know is that there is nothing to know. Because the more you know, the more you have to unlearn in order to really reach Prajna Paramita. But again, I think I'm confusing you. Again, it's normal. If this makes sense, then we wouldn't be talking right now. We'll be experiencing everything as they are. So I'm going to use this couplet written by my teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun, as a way for us to understand what do we mean by essentially there's nothing to attain. And this very couplet is quite interesting. If you read it, it says there's no self, no people, no world, which conforms to the teachings in the Heart Sutra. But then he comes back to really contradict what he has said by saying, actually, there is matter, there is reason and sentient beings. And so as I looked at this, I suddenly realized how my teacher wanted to help me or guide me towards the third level of reality is to realize that before you have nothing to attain, you have to first attain something. Before you become nothing, you have to become something. We can understand this by the very famous story in the Vimalakirti Sutra, right, where there was a great gathering of great bodhisattvas and the great arhats who went to see the ailing Vimalakirti. And this great man who says, "Oh, I'm so sick. How come the Buddha haven't sent any of his disciples to come see me?" And none of his disciples were willing to go see Vimalakirti because he was so eloquent, so smart, that everything they say, even as great bodhisattvas, will be rebutted. And so one of the very famous things in the Vimalakirti Sutra happens like this. As the great bodhisattvas and arhats, which ironically were all men in the room, were discussing the Dharma, this lady appeared in the room and began to walk around. And so it much displeased Sariputra, the man in the center, who said, "How dare you, a woman, appear in front of us great men and arhats when we were talking about non-duality or Prajnaparamita?" But what he never realized was that this woman or this lady was a manifestation of a Buddha who has gone beyond. So jokingly, the woman pointed at Sariputra and turned him into a woman. So Sariputra started to panic. He didn't know what happened, right? How can I, a great man and a great arhat, be turned into a woman? And so the lady says, "Well, you said you're so great, right? So why don't you turn yourself back into a man?" And Sariputra shamefully said, "I don't know how to turn myself back into a man." And so the lady says, "It's the same thing. You being a woman is as much as I not being a man. We are all the same because we're all Buddhas." And after saying that, she turned him back into a man. And then Sariputra continued by asking, "I see you're no ordinary person. So where do you come from?" And she says, "I come from where you came from." Confusing Sariputra more, he pressed on by saying, "Okay, so if this is the way it is, then tell me, when will you ever attain enlightenment?" And the lady says to Sariputra, "I will attain enlightenment on the day you turn into a woman." A very interesting riddle that happened in one of the smartest written literary Buddhist form to tell us that when we try to get a glimpse into what we mean by Prajnaparamita, we see that the bodhisattvas who come very close to this idea are the ones who regard all living beings as themselves. The path of non-duality is to see no difference between the self and others. Wisdom and compassion in its highest form. That's the only way to reach the far shore. So again, what happened in the story is the lady wanted to tell Sariputra that even if you attain enlightenment, yet the rest of the world hasn't attained enlightenment, your enlightenment is not true enlightenment. Because you are a part of the world, how can you alone attain salvation? That was the question. And so, to push this equation further, it means the moment when you realize that your own enlightenment is an enlightenment, it becomes true enlightenment. It is the moment when the gate of non-duality becomes open for you to experience this extremely amazing totality that you share with the rest of the world. But the irony is, before you attain something, you have to let go. Before you overcome suffering, you have to experience suffering. That is what the Buddha was saying. So this man from San Francisco, Kevin Hines, was a man who, at age 19, having suffered from severe depression, decided that it would be the day when he would jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. On the day, he walked past many people, and the moment he jumped off the bridge, he immediately regretted having done so. Having decided that he would end his own life, the moment he jumped off the bridge, he decided that he wanted to live on. Because what happened was, falling at 60 hours per kilometer at the speed, when he smashes into the water, it's the same as having your body smashing into concrete, where every part of his spine broke, and when he drowned in a 0-degree temperature water, he felt like 1,000 needles pinching through every part of his organ. He said it was hell. He regretted the pain, but miraculously he lived on. He took 2 years of rehabilitation, and when he came back, he told us the story. He said to the people who wrote his story that on the day when he decided to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, he made a pact with himself that he would give up on the idea of committing suicide as long as there's one single person who turned and smiled at him. But no one did. He walked that 10-minute walk from the car park to the center of the Golden Gate Bridge, but nobody did. That made him feel extremely alone. But nevertheless, after he recovered, he came back and founded a foundation to prevent suicide. He traveled all across North America to spread the message of the importance of life, and he reached out to youth who felt alone and helpless to share his own experiences. So 2 years later, he went back to the spot where he jumped off. He became the man who came back and started to help people. So what actually prompted him to help people was that moment of extreme despair and hopelessness that inspired him. So if we want to go back to the Heart Sutra, to say what exactly is there to attain, right? You have to first realize by letting go, you attain. Right? By experiencing great suffering, you become liberated from suffering. This is one of the greatest teachings that we read in the heart of the Buddha's teachings. This is one of the greatest teachings for us to really harmonize both ends of the extreme, to realize what it means to actually travel to the far shore. And so I probably only offered 1% of how we can understand the Heart Sutra today, but I just want to say it's been an extremely fascinating experience for us to look at reality on so many different levels. Then to come back to realize that the best way to reach the far shore is simply to live on with reality and as who we are. This is what my teacher has taught me. Venerable Master Xing Yun, the founder of Wogongshan and Liang, began his tedious journey of Dharma propagation at age 26 when he arrived in Taiwan, where he had no place to live. No one was willing to offer him a bed or any bowl of food. But uniquely, he rose above his suffering and said, I'm going to remember this day of extreme hunger so that in the future, when I can afford to feed anybody who enters my door, I'm going to keep that door open. So the suffering gave him greater inspiration to help more people. And for those of you who actually attended last night's talk given by Venerable Ruchang, you will hear about the very touching story of how he still tries to help people at age 93, having lost 99% of his vision, having become immobile. And all he can still think about is ways to rise above joy. And so I would say, if I was in that situation, would I be able to become as inspirational and optimistic as my teacher? Probably no. Because he says to us, despite my old age, I will still tell you that every bit of joy counts. So I'm going to do everything I can. So having been almost visually impaired, he writes pieces of good wishes on his one-stroke calligraphy to share with the world so he can offer hope. He can continue to raise funds to help young students complete their education. Because he says, every bit of joy counts, for every bit of joy gives rise to right mindfulness. And every bit of right mindfulness lessens one least bit of suffering. In other words, continue to try. Do everything you can to find that joy with every bit of life that is left in you. And so how do I see the level of non-attainment in my teacher? I would see as Avalokiteshvara who displays an extreme level of wisdom and compassion. My teacher too displays true wisdom who does not look into reality. So there's no self, there's no world, there's no phenomena. But he also displays true compassion that does not seek his own well-being or emancipation by saying that although I don't see anything within myself, I see you, I see matter, I see every living being who needs help. That is his ability to switch in and out of reality, in and out of that ultimate peace and tranquility to make sure that he is connected with the rest of us. So as he continues to write, how do we come to understand that third level? This is another piece where it says, after seeing the previous couplet that says, no self, no other, no world. Again, he says, no other, no self becomes a state of perfect ease. But ultimately, that's the only way for you to see your true Buddha. To not abide in either emptiness or existence. So how does he do this? He does not abide in his sickness, but he makes use of every bit of strength he has left in him. This is a picture 6 months after his craniotomy. Having suffered from such a massive stroke, the doctors declared that he may never speak for the next 2 years. He may never be able to write for another few years. But he overthrew the doctor's answer 6 months later. He picked up his brush and continued to write. And as he writes, we can't help but think about the many ways of how he overcame illness and suffering with the display of his own body. For example, you might remember the photo last night when he had these tubes connected to his arm as he was writing. It was the day when he suffered from a severe flu, and so his attendants and his medical team talked him into going to the hospital. But for the whole day, after he was treated, he insisted on coming back to Bowangshan so he can continue writing. So the doctor said to Venerable Master, look, Venerable Master, we know you have a job to do, but now your job is to look after yourself. And then my teacher turned to him and says, I understand that we all have a job. So I have to tell you that right now your job is to cure people, but my job is to deliver sentient beings. So allow me to go home and continue that work. Therefore, the doctor had no choice but to release him for 2 hours so he could go home to write. He went home to write, and it made everybody nervous. Because he was still suffering from the flu, he was also having diarrhea. And therefore, when these disciples came to see him and asked how he was, he would tell us to go back to work. He would say, why are you here? And then when we told him that, yes, Venerable Master, we're here to see how you're doing because we heard you were sick, he would tell us, no, I'm not sick. I'm just a little inconvenienced. So don't worry about me. Go back to what you're doing. I'll be fine. He continued to write and write and write until one of his closest attendants, this lady who said to her, Master, let go, let go. And so upon hearing this, Venerable Master picked up the brush and wrote 2 words, which said, let go. And then he put down the brush and says, what I need to let go is only my physical body. But what I can never let go is my connection with the rest of you. 我要放下的是色身，不是众生。That shut everybody up. Because we had finally realized it was his way of overcoming his suffering. It was his way of overcoming his restrictions. Because any moment he bears the need of people in mind, he will find the energy to keep moving. So by saying yes to overcome all ills and suffering, the greatest compassion and wisdom that Avalokiteshvara, in the form of either Venerable Master Xing Yun and so many people can display, will be to remember our connection with the rest of the world, and also remember that my enlightenment is your enlightenment, and your enlightenment is my enlightenment. So if you don't get there, I'm going to stay with you. There will be no pranya paramita. And by that, it means, this is what we mean by there is nothing to attain. So I hope I haven't confused you all the way along. I hope there's some kind of pointers to how we slowly learn to find our way to apply the very teaching of the Heart Sutra. But I would have to share with you that having realized that the best way to reconcile the 2 extremes is something which taught by Venerable Master Xing Yun in his very own interpretation of this piece. This piece says Ta Xing Tong. And we usually understand mind reader as someone who can read every single thought in somebody else. But I was so shocked when I came to realize this is how he defines a mind reader. He says a mind reader is one who is willing to achieve a win-win outcome, who is willing to put yourself in others' shoes, and to make sure that when in the process of attaining your goal, you have to also help others achieve theirs too. And secondly, we've also seen practitioners seeking to achieve the ability of what we call 宿命通, the ability to see your past and your future. He comes and defines 宿命通, or the ability to know your past and future life, as a willingness to live in coexistence. That is that continuous recognition of the interconnectedness of all beings. So if you want to ask somebody, what is it like to attain enlightenment? I would say he would tell you that he won't be able to tell you because he hasn't attained enlightenment. But he will tell you that the closest experience is that anyone who is without compassion will never get even closer to that state of enlightenment because they come hand in hand. So what is that interconnectedness? This is at an event that happens in Foguangshan every year, where 1,200 college students from over 40 countries will gather at Foguangshan to learn about the way of life as taught by the Buddha. And this lady on the left was 16 years old, who had received 3 years of full scholarship in our Guangming College in Manila. She was a Catholic. She never met Venerable Master Xing Yun. So when she finally, after 3 years of full scholarship given by this old Buddhist monk, when she finally met him, she asked him one question. She said, "Thank you, Venerable Master, but I'm wondering, we've never met you, and you don't know who we are. Why are you willing to help us?" In one single line, Venerable Master replied, "We are one. As long as we're family, I'll do everything I can do to help you." She was so touched, she went on to make a next comment. She said, "Thank you, Master. We're extremely touched by your kindness, and we promise you that within 10 years, all graduates from our university will endeavor to help you spread Buddhism, and that we will all utilize what we have learned to play a part to contribute to world peace. When she said that, the Venerable Master was 90 years old, and she made a promise to him that won't happen for another 10 years. So as I interpreted for my teacher, I couldn't help but wonder, would this promise ever come true? Would my master simply say thank you and move on to the next question? But to my surprise, Venerable Master, with his impaired vision turned in the direction of the girl, said, "Thank you. If I don't live to see that day, I will come back in my next life to see you." That was extremely touching. That was the only moment I have ever failed in my entire career as his interpreter to be speechless. Because upon that moment, I once again experienced the transcendence of time and space. I was able to witness a promise made between a 16-year-old girl and a 90-year-old Buddhist monk across age, across time, so that they will come back together and create a good cause together. So in one way, I would say Venerable Master had attained nothing. Yet he had won the heart of the entire world by being that selfless, compassionate, wise Bodhisattva. And so I would say the Heart Sutra has many mystical, vague, but very wise messages that awaits us to explore. But so far, I have been very fortunate to witness the Heart Sutra in action, demonstrated by my teacher. So finally, to close with this journey, Avalokiteshvara says with a mantra, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha. My translation of this mantra is Avalokiteshvara, having said all of the above, turned to Sariputra and said, I want to tell you one final thing. I want to tell you that none of the above things said are teachings. They're just mantras. So Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate was a summary of the very heart and core of the Buddha's teachings to show us that you don't need to explore the deep concepts. You don't need to understand the complicated connections. As long as you're willing to give yourself a chance to tread the path, to find the home that is called your heart and mind, and to see that your true self is away, no self, you will have already reached the far shore, which is Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate. So in conclusion, today I want to summarize and conclude by saying that I have said nothing today. Because what I've been saying can be summarized into these 3 words. You are a Buddha. We are all Buddhas. We all have the ability to live that best, compassionate and wise self, as long as we're willing to not fall into any of the ends, stay balanced, and remain connected to reality and the rest of the world. Before you let go of reality, stay connected. Before you awake, sleep your way through, struggle your way through, find your way through confusion, and at the end of that path, you will see the Parasamgate. So good luck to all of you as Buddhas. I hope this has shortened your gap between the Heart Sutra and you. And if you haven't, it's okay. You're not alone. We'll continue to tread that path together as one. So thank you very much for listening.
To ask Lydia Chow to stand up. I think you had would like to give our speaker a gift. Lydia Chow is an elder advisor of the Buddhist Lights International Association.
Before we open for Q&A, sincere appreciation to Venerable Miao Guang for her outstanding talk. I think all of you here are touched and impressed by her talking. A big tree falls in this campus, and we are all here to witness the sun. Thanks to you. To create a path for us to find, to create, to enlighten ourselves. And I hope we will all be a Buddha one day. Although she didn't say a word today, but it's a lot. So thank you so much. My sincere appreciation to Venerable Wu Chan as well. Both of them came from Taiwan, and most of you know that Taiwan's Ava airline was on strike. So they immediately routed to Hong Kong, took Cathay Pacific instead, and arrived in the United States just in order to make their commitment to us. So I really appreciate it. To Venerable Jefa, our leading, to the leadership of thanks to their leadership, so we have this organization to enable every talk or events possible. And thank you to all the BLI members who make this event possible. Thank you all.
Very much, Lydia. So we'd like to have a question and answer session now. So does anybody have any questions you would like to ask our speaker?
Hi, I'm so honored to be here, to see you, to be with everyone. I want to ask you a question. It's amazing how I decided to come today, and yesterday I had a breakdown with my sister. She's the only one that I call when I have a breakdown. I've been, I'm not going to say battling depression, but since I was 16, and it tends to come back when I'm alone or when I feel alone. So I come before you to just get some clarity of how I should feel, when I'm alone, or because my mind seems to feel alone when I look around and see that no one's there. But I know when I close my eyes, I'm near, but it still feels I'm like alone. So I just want you to somehow give me clarity of how I should, not feel, but how should I cope with, especially when not a lot of people have the same spiritual sense as I. I'm 22 and I'm a little different from everybody else, so I sometimes feel alone because I have certain things or I have a different way of life, so.
Thank you very much for the question. Before I answer your question, I would just like to ask you to hang in there. No matter how hopeless or helpless, don't stop trying. Keep trying because you'll never learn. When I went to Australia, I had no friends in school because I couldn't speak English. And the teachers made fun of me, and my schoolmates pretty much teased me every day. It was not a day when I managed to make it from the locker room to my classroom without being pushed into the wall. But somehow I consider myself lucky because my brother got thrown into the garbage bin almost every week. So, he got the short end of the stick. But nevertheless, these were the moments when I felt most alone because I never felt I was understood. I never felt found. Then came this amazing message that I read in the books, which is translated into simple English that says, "No man's an island." So we do appreciate the moments when we can be unique, but we also appreciate this great privilege for us as living beings in the universe to stay closely connected, no matter how hard we try to sever that connection. And so in moments when we're alone, we seek deeper. But when you feel stuck, stop. Turn around to see other friends. 2 years ago, I had a chance to meet Thomas Freeman, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. And I too asked him that pretty much the same question because he had served in the Middle East in the first 20 years of his career, witnessing probably the most horrific sceneries of humanity. So my question for him was, what about the young people in those countries when they have no second chance at education, not even a second chance in life? What would you say to a young man who no longer sees peace as a reality? He looked at me for a few seconds. He considered his answer very carefully. And he says, first of all, we have to realize that when pain is experienced by an individual, is as real as ever. We can never go to anybody and say, the pain is empty, let it go, this is what the Buddha says. So he says, the best thing you can ever do when you feel alone is to reach out to people who can share your thoughts. Keep finding people who share that same thought, or reach out to friends who can share some positive energy with you. And so enjoy your time with your friend, but also enjoy the time when you get to be free. So I would say moments when you're alone, treat it as an amazing opportunity to explore deep breathing. If you explore deep breathing, you get to realize you have 4 very special people within you. They are your 4 wives. This goes like a story as follows. There was a rich man who had 4 wives. He was very rich, but as he came near the end of his life, he started to think about the horror of dying alone. So he wanted to find one of his wives who would die with him. He first turned to his 4th wife, the youngest, right, whom he bought a lot of jewelry and things for. And he says to her, you are the one who I've loved the most. I bought you the most things, right? I've taken the greatest care of you. So when I die, would you be happy to come with me? The 4th wife immediately said, no, how can I die with you? I'm young and I'm beautiful. Right? When you die, go ahead alone. I'm not going to come with you. And so he turned to his 3rd wife and asked the same question. Right? Although I haven't bought as many things for you, I've spent most of my time with you. So when I die, would you come with me? The 3rd wife says, please have some compassion with me. Right? I still have a lot to do in life. I can go and remarry. So I'm not going to die with you. So not giving up, he turned to his 2nd wife and asked the same question, right? Whom he may not have bought a lot of things, but he has entrusted most his property and real estate to. And then the 2nd wife says, I'm very sorry, darling. I cannot die with you. Because if I die with you, who's going to take care of all these houses? But don't worry, I promise to personally send you to the crematorium. And he's left with no choice but to turn to his 1st wife, who was the oldest, whom he had never spent time with or bought anything for. He thought he needed to give up, but nevertheless, when he asked that question, the 1st wife says, of course, I'm your wife. I will come with you when you die. So the moral of the story is that, as I've said in the beginning of the story, that we all each have these 4 wives. The 4th wife is our body. When it's young, we take care of the body, we try to decorate it, we make sure it's well taken care of. But when we die, it's never going to come with us. And the 3rd wife represents our possessions. Right? We can own many of these things, but when we die, we can never bring any of them with me. Eventually, these possessions will find a new owner, so they will remarry. And the 2nd wife represents our friends and family, who may love and care for us, but the furthest they can go is to send us out to the crematorium, bid us goodbye, and then go back to their busy lives. So what does the first wife represent? The first wife represents our heart, whom we hardly take care of, whom we never speak to. So when we realize we each have these 4 wives, what we need to remind ourselves is to cherish the time we have with our body, take care of our health when we can, enjoy your possessions. We work so hard for it, right? And look after and cherish the times we have with our friends and family. But most importantly, when we're alone, spend time to talk to yourself. Spend time to enjoy your own hobby in your reading. Spend time to meditate and spend some time to explore, because your heart will be your most loyal friend. Therefore, don't be afraid of being alone with that heart. It is your greatest possession. It is your Buddha within. Good luck. Thank you for the question.